Chapter 1 The night everything tilts. Jacob Reynolds had learned, over the years, to recognize the difference between chaos and noise. Chaos was missed deadlines, unclear expectations, people talking past one another, while problems quietly multiplied. Noise was laughter over dinner, overlapping conversations, the clink of glasses and the low pulse of music bleeding in from another room. Noise could be tuned out. Chaos required intervention. This, Jacob decided as he leaned back slightly in his chair and watched the table, was noise. Friday nights with friends had become rare enough that he noticed them now. Not because he disliked them, he didn't, but because his weeks had developed a certain gravity. Late nights at the office, early mornings with coffee that tasted faintly burnt no matter where he bought it. The steady accumulation of responsibility. He didn't resent it. He'd chosen it. Across from him, Helen Parks laughed at something someone said, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. The touch was familiar, easy. 7 months in, it felt earned. Jacob smiled, listening more than he spoke, the way he always did in groups. He liked observing dynamics, noting who interrupted, who softened the edges of conversations, who steered topics away from awkwardness. It was a skill that had translated well into leadership. People liked feeling understood, even when they didn't realize that was what they were responding to. "You're quiet," Helen said, tilting her head toward him. "Just enjoying," Jacob replied. "You're all in rare form tonight." "That's because we're celebrating," one of their friends said. Helen finally got her schedule back under control. Helen groaned. "Don't remind me." Jacob squeezed her arm gently. "You handled it." She smiled at him then, warm, unguarded. And for a brief moment, everything aligned exactly the way he believed it had been. The restaurant was dim but elegant, the kind of place that tried not to look like it was trying. Candlelight, dark wood, understated menus. When they finished eating, the group migrated to a local dance club a few blocks away, the night air cool and buzzing with possibility. The first hour passed easily. Drinks arrived. Music pulsed. Someone pulled Jacob onto the dance floor, and he went, awkward at first and then laughing at himself. Helen danced with her friends, hair catching the light, energy effortless. Jacob checked his watch once, out of habit more than necessity, and decided he could stay another hour. He was relaxed, content. Then a man appeared at their table. Jacob noticed him only because Helen did. She turned sharply, her face lighting up with unmistakable recognition. "Oh my God," she said, already standing. The man grinned. "I was hoping you'd still be here." Helen stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The hug lingered longer than a greeting hug should, Jacob thought distantly. Still, he didn't move. He waited. Then she kissed him. Not on the cheek. Not a quick peck meant to defuse tension. It was brief, but it was deliberate, lips meeting lips with a familiarity that had weight. Jacob felt something cold slide through his chest. The table erupted in greetings, overlapping voices. Someone clapped the man on the shoulder. Another pulled up a chair. No one looked at Jacob. No one paused. The world apparently had not shifted at all. Jacob stayed where he was, his hands folded loosely in front of him. His mind moved with strange clarity. Shock arrived first, sharp and electric. Anger followed, hot and immediate. Hurt seeped in underneath, heavier, slower. And then, under all of it, a quiet understanding settled into place. This was not a misunderstanding. Helen laughed, her hand still on the man's arm. "Everyone, this is Mark." Jacob stood. The movement went unnoticed at first. He waited for the right moment, for someone to look at him and ask a question he could answer politely. It didn't come. So he stepped back from the table, picked up his jacket, and walked away. No confrontation. No raised voice. No desperate attempt to salvage something that had already revealed itself to be unsalvageable. Outside, the night air felt colder than before. The music thudded faintly through the walls as Jacob crossed the parking lot, each step steady, measured. His heart hammered, but his hands were calm. He sat in his car for a moment without turning the engine on. 7 months, he thought. Not wasted. Just informative. Jacob pulled out his phone. He blocked Helen's number, removed her from his social media. Took less than a minute. He exhaled, long and slow. He wasn't furious with her, not really. He was furious with himself, for assuming alignment without confirmation, for trusting implication over explicit agreement. He had been clear about his intentions. He had not been clear enough about his expectations. That was on him. But what came next was simple. He started the car and drove home, the city lights blurring past as his life adjusted, quietly but decisively, onto a new track. Chapter 2, Aftershocks and Autopilot. By Monday morning, Jacob Reynolds had reorganized his entire kitchen. He hadn't planned to. It just happened, the way some people cleaned when they were stressed or ran or called their mothers. Jacob sorted. He aligned. He imposed order on small, controllable systems because it reminded him that not everything dissolved without warning. The mugs were now arranged by size instead of sentiment. The spice rack had been alphabetized. He stood back at 7:30, coffee in hand, and nodded once, as if the cabinets had passed inspection. "Good enough," he muttered, locking the door behind him. The drive to work was uneventful. Traffic moved. Podcasts played. The city looked the same as it always had, which was both comforting and faintly insulting. Jacob had half expected the skyline to acknowledge that something fundamental had shifted. It hadn't. At the office, his badge beeped him through security, and his day began the way it always did, with purpose. Jacob's team was already gathered when he stepped into the glass-walled conference room. They looked up, conversations pausing mid-sentence. "Morning," he said. "Morning," came the chorus. He dropped his laptop onto the table, loosened his tie, and launched into the agenda. Deliverables, timelines, a few dry jokes that earned polite laughter. He asked questions, listened carefully to answers, redirected when needed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush anyone. He had learned early on that calm authority lasted longer than urgency. By 10:30, he was deep into a metrics review when Sarah, one of his senior analysts, tilted her head at him. "Are you okay?" she asked. Jacob glanced up. "Why?" "You reorganized the entire project tracker," she said. "Color-coded, with footnotes." He paused, looked down at the screen, considered. "Preventative maintenance," he said. "Keeps things from unraveling." Sarah smiled faintly. "Right, of course it does." The meeting continued, but the question lingered. Jacob wasn't brooding. That surprised him. He had expected the aftermath of Friday night to arrive like a storm, loud, disruptive, impossible to ignore. Instead, it was more like an undercurrent, a persistent awareness that something was no longer there, followed closely by the relief of not having to carry it anymore. At lunch, he ate at his desk, reviewing a proposal he'd volunteered to lead, a cross-department initiative that everyone else had quietly avoided. It was complicated, under-resourced, and visible enough to matter. The kind of challenge that made his supervisor arch an approving eyebrow. His phone buzzed. Group chat. "Friday survivors Alex. You alive?" "Nina, he's alive. He just hasn't spoken to any of us since the incident." Jacob stared at the screen for a moment before typing. "Jacob, I'm fine." "Alex, define fine." Jacob breathing. "Employed. Uninjured." "Nina, did you actually ghost Helen in the middle of the night?" "Jacob, I left quietly." "Alex, that's a yes." "Nina, proud of you. Also furious on your behalf." Jacob smiled despite himself. "Jacob, it was clarifying." "Alex, that's the most Jacob sentence I've ever read." "Nina, we're getting drinks this week." "Jacob, I'm busy." "Alex, you're emotionally compromised." "That doesn't count as busy." Jacob set the phone face down and returned to the proposal. He wasn't avoiding his friends. He just didn't want to narrate his own disappointment. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He finished the workday with the same efficiency he'd started it. But when 5:30 arrived, he stayed put. The office thinned around him. Lights dimmed. Someone waved goodbye through the glass. At 6:15, his supervisor, Mark, stopped by his desk. "You don't have to stay late," Mark said. "I know," Jacob replied. "I want to." Mark studied him for a beat. "You sure you're not using work as a coping mechanism?" Jacob met his gaze evenly. "Would it be working if I were?" Mark laughed. "Fair enough. About that cross-department project, you're officially leading it. Kickoff is Wednesday." "Great. You'll be partnering with operations." Jacob nodded. "I'll reach out." As Mark walked away, Jacob leaned back in his chair and exhaled. New variables, new systems, forward motion. That night, at home, he cooked an actual meal instead of defaulting to takeout. Pasta, garlic, something green. He ate at the counter, scrolling through emails he didn't need to answer yet, and realized halfway through that he hadn't thought about Helen once since lunch. The realization didn't hurt. Tuesday followed the same rhythm until it didn't. Jacob entered the operations floor just before noon, folder tucked under his arm, mind already mapping introductions and objectives. Operations was louder than his department. Less glass, more movement. Phones rang. People argued amiably across desks. A woman stood near the whiteboard, arms crossed, listening to a heated explanation from a man waving a spreadsheet printout like a flag. "No," she said calmly. "That's not a supply issue. That's a forecasting error." "It's not." "It is," she interrupted, not raising her voice. "And if you stop panicking for 30 seconds, I'll show you why." The man deflated slightly. She took the paper, scanned it, and circled something with a pen. "There," she said. "You're counting the same variable twice." He stared, then sighed. "Oh." Jacob watched, intrigued despite himself. She turned, caught him looking, and raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" "Jacob Reynolds," he said, stepping forward. "Project lead for the integration initiative." Her expression shifted. "Professional. Assessing. Maya Collins. Operations." She glanced at the folder. "You're early." "Habit." She smiled, quick and sharp. "We start in 5. "I can wait." "Good," she said, already turning back to the board. "You'll need patience." Jacob settled into a nearby chair, observing. Maya moved with purpose, her humor dry, her corrections precise. People listened to her, not because she demanded it, but because she was usually right. He felt a flicker of interest that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with competence. When the meeting began, it was immediately clear that Maya did not care that Jacob was younger than most project leads, or that he was on a promotion track, or that he spoke with careful authority. She challenged his assumptions. He countered with data. The room leaned in. "This timeline is optimistic," she said. "It's achievable," Jacob replied. "If everything goes perfectly." "It won't," he agreed. "That's why there's buffer." She studied him. "You built in buffer?" "Yes. Most people don't." "I'm not most people." That earned him a look, measured, curious. By the end of the meeting, they hadn't agreed on everything, but they'd established something better than consensus: momentum. As people filtered out, Maya lingered. "You don't flinch," she said. "At what?" "Pushback." Jacob shrugged. "It's usually not personal." She considered that. "Interesting." She gathered her notes. "This project's going to be messy. Most worthwhile things are." Maya smiled then, not polite, not sharp. Something softer. "We'll see," she said and walked away. Jacob watched her go, aware of a subtle shift inside him. Not hope, not longing, just the quiet, unmistakable sense that something new had entered the system. And this time he was paying attention. Chapter 3: The Wrong First Impression. By Thursday afternoon, Jacob Reynolds had learned 3 things about Maya Collins. First, she hated meetings that could have been emails. Second, she despised vague language, especially when it came wrapped in optimism. And third, most troubling, she had a talent for making him feel like he was perpetually one step behind, even when he was fairly certain he wasn't. They were standing in a converted conference room that operations had claimed years ago and never quite relinquished. One wall was a whiteboard dense with diagrams and notes. Another was cluttered with mismatched shelves holding binders that looked older than Jacob. Maya stood in front of the board, marker in hand, having just dismantled a supply chain assumption he'd made in the kickoff deck. "You're treating this like a clean handoff," she said, underlining a box he'd labeled integration complete. "It is," Jacob replied evenly. "At least from our side." "There is no our side," Maya said, tapping the marker against the board. "There's just reality." Jacob folded his arms, considering. "Reality still has phases." "Yes," she said. "Messy ones." A couple of analysts hovered near the doorway, pretending to be deeply invested in their tablets while absolutely listening. Jacob met Maya's gaze. "If you have a better sequencing model, I'm open to it." She studied him as if waiting for the catch. "You're actually open to it?" "Yes." "No defensiveness?" "I save that for things that matter." Her lips twitched. "Bold strategy." She turned back to the board and began sketching an alternative flow, narrating as she went. It was sharper than his original model, less elegant, more accurate. Jacob watched, his irritation slowly giving way to reluctant admiration. When she finished, she stepped back. "That's closer to how this will actually unfold." Jacob nodded. "I agree." She turned, surprised. "You do?" "Yes." "That's it?" she asked. "No, but we'll need additional resourcing in phase 2, he said calmly. "Which I already flagged." She paused, looked at him again. Really looked this time. "Okay," she said. "Point for you." "Did we start keeping score?" Jacob asked. Maya capped the marker. "Only in my head." The analysts scattered, sensing the meeting's end. Jacob gathered his notes, but before he could leave, Maya spoke again. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. They stepped into the hallway, the low hum of the operations floor filling the space between them. Maya moved quickly, as if perpetually late for something even when she wasn't. "You volunteered for this project," she said. "Why?" Jacob matched her pace. "Because it's complicated." "That's not an answer." "It is for me." She shot him a sideways glance. "You enjoy pain?" "I enjoy solving problems other people avoid." "Hero complex." He smiled faintly. "Efficiency preference." She snorted. "You're young." Jacob blinked. "I'm sorry. For this role," she clarified. "Not young in general. You carry yourself like someone older." "I'll take that as a compliment." "Don't," she said. "It usually means you haven't been burned enough yet." Jacob stopped walking. Maya took 2 more steps before realizing he wasn't beside her. "Or," he said, "it means I've learned quickly." She turned back, arms crossing. "You think you know how this ends." "I think planning improves outcomes." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she shook her head. "Careful, Reynolds," she said. "That kind of confidence tends to annoy people." "Does it annoy you?" She smiled sharp again. "Ask me in 6 weeks." By Friday, the project had developed a pulse. Emails flew. Calendars filled. Tensions surfaced in predictable places. Jacob thrived in the structure, setting clear expectations, absorbing frustration without deflecting it. Maya remained a constant counterweight, questioning timelines, poking holes, refusing to be soothed by assurances that weren't backed by data. They argued twice before noon. The first time was about reporting cadence. "Weekly is too slow," Maya said. "By the time we catch issues, they'll have metastasized." "That's dramatic," Jacob replied. and inaccurate. Operations doesn't have the luxury of hindsight, and leadership doesn't have the capacity for daily updates. She leaned forward, palms on the table. Then leadership needs to adjust. Jacob met her stance without raising his voice. Or operations needs to summarize. Her eyes narrowed. You're suggesting? I'm suggesting a hybrid, he interrupted gently. Daily internal check-ins. Weekly executive brief. The room went quiet. Maya straightened. Fine, she said. That works. The second argument was about ownership, and it was less tidy. You can't assign that to my team, Maya said. They're already stretched. Then suggest an alternative, Jacob replied. I am. You take it. Jacob exhaled. That's not reasonable. Neither is pretending bandwidth is imaginary. The tension crackled, sharp enough that someone coughed nervously. Jacob leaned back in his chair. Maya, he said evenly. We can solve this without turning it into a standoff. Her jaw tightened. You're the one pushing. I'm prioritizing. At our expense. At the projects, he corrected. She stared at him for a long moment, then gathered her notebook and stood. I need air, she said, before I say something unprofessional. Jacob watched her leave, pulse steady but chest tight. Well, someone murmured. That was intense. Jacob didn't respond. He stared at the empty chair Maya had left behind, replaying the exchange. He hadn't dismissed her concerns. He'd offered compromise. So why did it feel like he'd misstepped? An hour later, his phone buzzed. Maya Collins. Roof. 5 minutes. Jacob didn't hesitate. The roof was mostly empty, the city stretching out in hazy lines beyond the safety rail. Maya stood near the edge, arms folded, wind tugging at her hair. I don't like being overruled, she said without turning. I didn't overrule you. You outmaneuvered me. He joined her, keeping a respectful distance. That wasn't my intention. It's what happened. Jacob considered his words carefully. I don't see this as you versus me. She laughed softly. Everyone says that. I mean it. She turned then, eyes searching his face. Why? Because I don't gain anything by undermining you, he said. And because you're right more often than you're not. That caught her off guard. You don't have to flatter me. I'm not. She studied him, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. You're frustrating. So I've been told. She huffed a laugh despite herself. You listen. That's not common. It's efficient. There it is again, she said. You reduce everything to function. Not everything. She tilted her head. Like what? Jacob thought of Friday nights that ended abruptly, of kitchens reorganized at dawn, of walking away instead of demanding explanations. Some things, he said, don't benefit from optimization. Maya watched him closely. You're more complicated than you pretend to be. So are you. She looked away, the wind filling the space between them. Maybe, she said. Or maybe I just don't like being surprised. Neither do I. She met his gaze again, something unspoken passing between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Truce? She asked. Truce, Jacob agreed. They stood there a moment longer, the city humming beneath them. When they headed back inside, the air felt different. Not settled, but recalibrated. And for the first time since Friday night, Jacob realized something else had changed. He wasn't just moving forward. He was being challenged in ways that had nothing to do with pain, and everything to do with possibility. Chapter 4. Almost, but not quite, the problem with momentum, Jacob discovered, was that it demanded attention. By the following week, the project had entered the phase where issues no longer announced themselves politely. They surfaced mid-conversation, halfway through emails, in offhand remarks that began with, this might be nothing, but, and ended with 3 hours of recalibration. Jacob thrived in it. Maya did not let him get comfortable. They worked late on Tuesday, the operations floor thinning out until it was just the two of them, the hum of cleaning machines echoing faintly down the hall. The whiteboard had been erased and rewritten twice. Coffee cups accumulated like evidence. Maya stood at the table, laptop open, hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd stopped caring about appearances sometime around hour 10. This dependency still bothers me, she said, pointing at the screen. It's unavoidable, Jacob replied from his chair. We mitigate, not eliminate. She frowned. You sound very calm about that. I am. That makes one of us. Jacob smiled faintly. You don't trust systems. I trust people who admit systems fail. Jacob leaned back. I've admitted that repeatedly. Not emotionally, she said. He blinked. I'm not sure that's a project requirement. She shot him a look. Everything is a project requirement if it affects execution. He considered that. Fair. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the kind that was no longer tense but not yet comfortable. Jacob found himself noticing small things. The way Maya chewed on the end of her pen when she was thinking. How she muttered to herself when numbers didn't line up. You're very focused, he said without thinking. She glanced up. So are you. I get paid to be. I don't, she replied. I do it anyway. That intrigued him. Why? She hesitated, fingers still on the keyboard. Because if I don't, things break. And when things break, people blame the wrong causes. Jacob nodded slowly. You like preventing invisible failures. Yes, she said. And I hate being surprised by them. Something about the way she said it lingered. They wrapped up close to 9. Jacob shut his laptop and stood, stretching. You hungry? Maya looked at the time. I skipped lunch. That's a yes. She hesitated again, then shrugged. There's a place down the street. It's not fancy. I prefer not fancy. They walked out together into the cool night air. The restaurant was small, brightly lit, and mostly empty. They took a booth near the window. Conversation shifted, loosened by food and the absence of agendas. So, Maya said, stirring her drink. You're very composed. Jacob smiled. That's one word for it. What's another? Guarded, he said honestly. She studied him. Why? He thought about it. About Friday nights that ended early. About assumptions that went unchallenged until they exploded. Because clarity matters to me, he said. And ambiguity has a way of masquerading as comfort. Maya raised an eyebrow. That sounds rehearsed. It's not, he said. It's just old. She laughed softly. You talk like someone who skipped a few steps. Maybe, he admitted. Or maybe I learned from other people's mistakes. Or your own. He met her gaze. That too. She didn't press. Instead, she took a bite of her food and nodded. You don't overshare. No. Refreshing, she said. Also frustrating. Likewise. She smiled at that more openly now. For a moment, Jacob felt it, the subtle pull of connection that wasn't quite attraction but wasn't nothing either. The sense that if he leaned in, figuratively or otherwise, something might shift. He didn't. Neither did she. They paid and walked back toward the office, the city quieter now. At the building entrance, Maya stopped. This was nice, she said, as if surprised by the word. It was, Jacob agreed. She hesitated, then added, we should do it again, when it's less tied to work. Jacob felt the moment crystallize, the invitation hovering, undefined. I'd like that, he said carefully. She nodded once, then turned and disappeared inside. Jacob stood there a beat longer than necessary before heading home. The next day was not as smooth. Jacob arrived to find an email thread spiraling. Operations frustrated, finance defensive, leadership impatient. He stepped in quickly, setting up a call, reframing the issue, assigning clear next steps. In the middle of it, Maya was quiet. Too quiet. After the call ended, she gathered her things without comment. Maya, Jacob said, catching up to her in the hallway. You okay? She stopped. I don't like being sidelined. You weren't. You answered for my team. I summarized. Without checking. Jacob frowned. Time was a factor. So was trust. The words landed harder than he expected. I wasn't undermining you, he said. I know, she replied. But intention doesn't erase impact. He took that in. You're right. She looked surprised again. I am. Yes. She waited, arms crossed. I should have looped you in, he continued. I was optimizing for speed. And I was optimizing for control, she said. Which isn't fair either. They stood there, the air thick with unsaid things. This is why I don't mix variables, she added quietly. Meaning, work and whatever this is. Jacob's chest tightened slightly. We haven't defined it. That's the problem, she said. Undefined things tend to collapse. He almost smiled. You really don't like ambiguity. She shook her head. Not when stakes are high. And are they? She hesitated just long enough to answer the question without answering it. They could be. That night, Jacob lay awake longer than usual. He replayed the week, the late nights, the easy conversation, the sudden tension. He recognized the pattern. Proximity creating possibility, possibility brushing up against fear. He wasn't in a rush. He never had been. But for the first time since Friday night, he felt the faint tug of wanting something he wasn't yet sure how to pursue without compromising the clarity he valued. Almost, he thought. Not yet. And maybe that was exactly where it needed to be. Chapter 5, The X returns, briefly. Jacob Reynolds did not expect Helen Parks to reappear on a Wednesday. If he had been asked to predict the timing, he would have said never, or at least not until enough time had passed for the moment to feel symbolic rather than inconvenient. Wednesday was neither. Wednesday was already overloaded. 2 escalation calls, a budget review, and a late afternoon sync with operations that Maya had requested with pointed brevity. He was leaving a conference room when he heard his name. Jacob. The voice was familiar enough that his body reacted before his mind did. He stopped, turned, and found Helen standing 10 feet away, her expression careful in a way that immediately put him on guard. She looked the same, hair a little shorter, confidence worn like armor. No visible sign of discomfort at having crossed his path. Hi, she said. Hi, Jacob replied. They stood there, an awkward island in the flow of office traffic. Someone brushed past, muttering an apology. I didn't know you worked here, Helen said. I didn't know you'd be here. Jacob answered honestly. She nodded. Fair. They moved toward a quieter corner near the windows. Jacob kept his posture open, neutral. He felt steady, curious even, but not pulled. I heard through a friend that you were leading the integration project, Helen said. I'm consulting with finance this week. That explains it. She hesitated. I wanted to apologize. Jacob waited. For Friday, she added, as if he might not remember which one. I figured, he said. I didn't handle it well. No, Jacob agreed calmly. You didn't. She flinched slightly. I didn't realize you thought we were exclusive. Jacob held her gaze. I didn't realize you thought we weren't. The silence stretched. I should have been clearer, she said. Yes, he replied. You should have. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, Jacob said. But intention isn't the same as alignment. She studied him, a little surprised by the phrasing. You sound different. I am. Are you seeing someone? She asked, a beat too quickly. Jacob considered the question. No. She smiled, relieved despite herself. I wondered if maybe we could. No, he said gently but firmly. The word landed cleanly between them. I'm not angry, he continued. I'm just not interested in revisiting something that showed me what I needed to know. Helen nodded slowly. You've always been very decisive. Only when it matters. Another pause. Then she exhaled. I'm glad you're doing well. I am, Jacob said, and he realized in saying it that it was true. They exchanged a brief, polite goodbye. Jacob watched her walk away without any lingering sense of loss. The chapter had closed. Not dramatically, just completely. He turned back toward his office and nearly collided with Maya. She had stopped short, eyes flicking from him to the direction Helen had gone. Her expression was unreadable. Sorry, Jacob said. Didn't see you there. It's fine, Maya replied. I was just passing through. They stood there, an echo of earlier awkwardness returning. Was that? Maya began then stopped. Never mind. Jacob waited. It was my ex. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Ex. Yes. Recent. Recent enough to still be relevant, he said carefully. But not current. Maya nodded a little too quickly. Good to know. The conversation stalled, the air cooling between them. We're still on for the sync, Jacob said. Yes, she replied. Conference room B. She turned and walked away before he could add anything else. The meeting was efficient and oddly distant. Maya was professional to the point of formality. Her earlier ease replaced by crisp summaries and minimal eye contact. Jacob noticed it immediately and resisted the urge to address it in front of others. Afterward, he caught up to her outside the room. Maya, he said, can we talk? She adjusted the strap of her bag. About the deliverables? I sent an update. About earlier. Her jaw tightened. There's nothing to talk about. There is, he said calmly, because something changed. She met his gaze, irritation flashing. I don't make a habit of dissecting people's personal lives at work. I don't either, Jacob replied. But I also don't like misinterpretations lingering. Her expression faltered. I didn't misinterpret anything. You did, he said gently. And I should have addressed it immediately. That's on me. She crossed her arms. Then address it now. That conversation was closure, he said. Not reconsideration. And it doesn't intersect with us or this project. Us, she repeated, the word sharp. You're assuming a lot. I'm acknowledging a variable, he said, which you're very good at identifying. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed once without humor. This is why I don't like overlap, she said. It creates noise, only if left unmanaged. Her gaze softened, just slightly. You're very confident in your ability to manage things. I'm confident in my willingness to be clear. She searched his face as if testing that statement for cracks. I don't want to be an assumption. You're not, Jacob said. You're a choice, if we ever get there. The words hung between them, quiet and deliberate. Maya looked away first. I need time, she said. Take it. She nodded once, then turned down the hall. That evening, Jacob met Alex and Nina for drinks. So, Nina said, sliding him a beer. Any dramatic developments? Define dramatic, Jacob replied. Alex leaned in. Did you see Helen again? Jacob paused. Yes. And? Nina demanded. And it ended appropriately. Alex grinned. Proud of you. Jacob smiled faintly. Me too. What about the new woman? Nina pressed. The one you won't stop pretending is just a coworker? Jacob took a sip. She's complicated. Alex laughed. That's the worst kind. Jacob didn't disagree. Later, at home, he sat at his kitchen counter, the familiar order of the space grounding him. He thought about clarity, how easily it could be delayed, how costly that delay could become. He wasn't interested in repeating old patterns. Not with Helen. Not with Maya. Whatever this was becoming, it would move forward deliberately or not at all. And for the first time, he sensed that Maya might be wrestling with the same choice. Chapter 6 of The Misstep. If Jacob Reynolds had been honest with himself, he would have admitted that agreeing to the date was less about readiness and more about pressure. It started innocently enough. Nina had introduced him to a friend of a friend at trivia night. Emily, early 30s, quick smile, confidently self-deprecating. She laughed at his dry jokes. She liked that he had his life together. She suggested coffee. Jacob said yes because saying no felt like stagnation. The problem became apparent within the first 6 minutes. They sat across from each other in a cafe that tried very hard to be charming. Exposed brick, reclaimed wood, plants suspended from the ceiling like they were part of a social experiment. Emily stirred her drink, watching him with interest that was not unkind but intensely evaluative. "So," she said, smiling brightly, "what are you looking for?" Jacob blinked. He hadn't even taken a sip of coffee yet. He paused, choosing honesty over smoothness. "Connection." She nodded rapidly. "Same, but like casual connection. No pressure." Jacob smiled politely. "I don't really do casual." "Oh," she said, undeterred. "That's okay. I don't either. I just don't like labels." "That's usually where we differ," Jacob said gently. She laughed. "You're funny." "I wasn't joking." Emily tilted her head. "You're intense." "Sometimes," he agreed. She leaned back, appraising him. "So you date with intention?" "Yes." "Marriage intention?" "Eventually." "Kids?" "Open to it." "Timeline?" Jacob paused. "That feels early." She waved a hand. "I like efficiency." Jacob almost laughed. Almost. They made it another 20 minutes. Long enough for Emily to explain her theory that relationships worked best when expectations were never explicitly stated. Long enough for Jacob to realize that he was having the same conversation he'd thought he'd finished 7 months ago. Only this time, the warning signs were highlighted in fluorescent ink. When they stood to leave, Emily smiled warmly. "You're great," she said, "but I think you might be too deliberate for me." Jacob returned the smile, genuinely relieved. "I think you might be too flexible for me." They shook hands like co-workers concluding a pleasant but unproductive meeting. Jacob walked home alone, hands in his pockets, the night air cool against his face. He didn't feel rejected. He felt clarified. He thought about Maya. He tried not to. The next morning, the office buzzed with an energy that suggested something had gone wrong somewhere important. Jacob scanned emails, triaging quickly, when Maya appeared at his desk. "We have a problem," she said. Jacob looked up. "Go on." "The vendor revised their delivery window." "That's not ideal. It's catastrophic for phase 3. Jacob stood. "Let's see." They commandeered a conference room, tension crackling as numbers shifted and timelines collapsed. Maya paced, frustration sharp and contained. "This is why I hate dependencies," she said. "They pretend to be stable until they aren't." Jacob rubbed his temples. "We can reroute. At a cost." "Yes." She stopped pacing. "Leadership won't like that. They'll like failure less." She studied him. "You're calm." "I'm annoyed," he said. "But panic is inefficient." She huffed. "You and your efficiency." "Say what you will," he replied. "It keeps me from making emotional decisions." Her gaze lingered on him. "Does it?" He hesitated just a fraction too long. Maya noticed. They worked through lunch, tension gradually shifting into focus. By mid-afternoon they had a plan, imperfect but workable. Maya leaned back in her chair, exhausted. "Nice recovery," she admitted. "Team effort." She smiled faintly. "You're annoyingly steady." "So I've heard." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Usually." She looked down at the table. "Did you go out with someone last night?" Jacob blinked, caught off guard. "Yes." Her shoulders stiffened. "Oh, it wasn't significant," he said quickly. "Not that I owe you an explanation." "No," she agreed. "You don't." Silence settled between them, heavier than before. "I didn't like how that felt," Maya said quietly. Jacob met her gaze. "Neither did I." She exhaled. "I don't want to be an option." "You wouldn't be," he said without hesitation. She searched his face. "Then what am I?" Jacob considered his answer carefully. "Someone I haven't figured out how to pursue without compromising what I value." Her lips curved into a wry smile. "You really know how to romance someone." He smiled back. "I'm working on it." She stood. "I need to think. Take all the time you need." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she added. "I'm not good at casual either." Then she left, leaving Jacob alone with the quiet hum of the building and a realization that settled deep in his chest. The misstep hadn't been going on the date. It had been pretending he could move sideways when everything in him wanted to move forward, with intention, with clarity, with someone who understood exactly why that mattered. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that Maya might be that someone, if they were both brave enough to stop orbiting and actually choose. Chapter 7: The Conversation That Matters. The rain started sometime after midnight, soft at first and then steady, the kind that erased edges and made the city feel briefly introspective. Jacob Reynolds noticed it when he woke before his alarm, the sound threading through his half-dreams until he gave up on sleep altogether. He lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, thinking about variables. He thought about how easily things could be mislabeled, how fear often masqueraded as practicality, how caution could be confused with disinterest. He thought about Maya's face when she'd said she didn't want to be an option, the way her voice hadn't wavered, even though something in her clearly had. By the time he got up, he knew what he needed to do. He just didn't know how she'd receive it. The office was quieter than usual, the rain thinning foot traffic and dampening moods. Jacob arrived early, as he always did, and spent the first hour clearing his inbox so there would be no excuses later. At 9:30, he sent Maya a message. "Can we talk today? Not about the project." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Lunch. Offsite. Jacob felt a flicker of relief. Name the place. There's a park 2 blocks east. Covered tables. I'll be there. The rain slowed to a mist by noon, the air cool and clean. The park was mostly empty. Wet benches, glistening leaves, the quiet persistence of water dripping from trees that hadn't quite decided to stop. Maya was already there when Jacob arrived, seated at one of the covered tables, coffee in hand. She wore a light jacket, her hair loose, expression guarded but not closed. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied. They sat across from each other, the space between them deliberate. "You said this wasn't about the project," Maya said. "It's not." She waited. Jacob folded his hands on the table, grounding himself in the cool wood. "I don't like leaving things unsaid." Her mouth curved slightly. "That's not the impression you give." "That's because I'm careful about what I say," he replied. "Not because I don't think about it." She studied him, eyes sharp but curious. "Okay. I went on that date because I thought it was what I was supposed to do," Jacob continued. "Because everyone around me assumes that after something ends, you fill the space as quickly as possible. And you don't agree with that," Maya said. "No," he said simply. "I don't." She took a sip of her coffee, buying time. "Then why do it?" "Because I didn't want a project hesitation where there wasn't any," he said. "And because I wasn't sure what to do with the fact that I wanted something I hadn't planned for." Her gaze lifted. "You don't strike me as someone who dislikes plans." "I don't," he said. "I dislike pretending they account for everything." The rain picked up slightly, drumming against the roof above them. Maya leaned back, folding her arms, not defensively, Jacob noticed, but protectively. "I don't do well with uncertainty," she said, "especially when stakes aren't clear." "I know. And I don't want to get invested in something that exists only because it's convenient," she added. "Or because it fills a gap." Jacob nodded. "Neither do I." She looked at him skeptically. "Then what are you proposing?" He met her gaze steadily. "Clarity." She almost laughed. "You say that like it's simple." "It's not," he said. "But it's honest." Maya waited, giving him the space to continue. "I don't date casually," Jacob said. "Not because I need guarantees, but because I need intention. I'm not interested in options or placeholders. If I pursue someone, it's because I see the possibility of building something real." Her expression softened despite herself. "You talk like commitment is a job offer." He smiled faintly. "I talk like someone who values follow-through." "And what about risk?" she asked. "What about getting it wrong?" "I accept that risk," he said. "What I don't accept is ambiguity disguised as flexibility." Maya stared out at the rain, silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I've been the person who got chosen last," she said. "More than once. Always because I was understanding. Or low maintenance." Jacob felt something tighten in his chest. "You're neither of those things." She smiled wryly. "Exactly. But I pretended to be, because it felt safer than asking for more." "And did it work?" he asked gently. "No," she said. "It taught me to expect less." Jacob leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking you to expect less." She looked back at him, searching. "What are you asking, then?" "I'm asking you to consider something deliberate," he said. "Not rushed, not undefined, but intentional." Her breath caught just a little. "And the project?" "Handled," Jacob said. "If this complicates it, we address that like professionals. But I won't pretend there isn't something here just because it doesn't fit neatly." Maya shook her head slowly. "You make it sound very reasonable." "I'm aware that feelings rarely are." A beat passed, then another. "You don't flirt," she said suddenly. Jacob blinked. You don't," she repeated. "You just state things." He smiled. "I find clarity attractive." She laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. "I don't know whether that's refreshing or terrifying." "Why not both?" She considered him, really considered him, as if seeing past the role he played so easily at work. "What if I say yes?" she asked, "and we realize we're incompatible?" "Then we'll know we didn't waste time pretending," Jacob said. "And we'll part with respect." "And if I say no?" "Then I'll accept that too," he said. "Because I'd rather hear an honest no than linger in uncertainty." Maya exhaled, long and slow. "You don't leave much room for fantasy." "I leave room for reality," he said. "Which tends to be more interesting." She smiled at that, genuine this time. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." The rain slowed again, the park brightening as clouds shifted overhead. Maya set her coffee down. Okay, she said. Jacob's pulse quickened, but he didn't interrupt. Okay, she repeated. Too intentional. To seeing where this goes without pretending it's nothing or everything. Relief washed through him. Not explosive, but grounding. That's all I'm asking. She held his gaze. But I need one thing. Name it. No disappearing, she said. No assumptions. If something shifts, we talk. Agreed. And no dating other people while we're figuring this out, she added, watching him closely. Jacob didn't hesitate. Agreed. Her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Good. They stood, an unspoken understanding settling between them. Not a promise, not a guarantee, but a shared direction. As they walked back toward the office, side by side, Maya glanced at him. So, she said, is this the part where we shake hands again? Jacob smiled. I was hoping for something slightly less formal. She slowed, turned to face him. Like what? Like coffee, he said. Tomorrow morning. Just us. No agenda. She considered, then nodded. I'd like that. They parted ways at the corner, the city unfolding around them, newly redefined. Jacob walked back to his building with a steady sense of alignment, not because everything was certain, but because for the first time in a while nothing important was being avoided. And that, he knew, was how things actually began. Chapter 8 Choosing Forward. Coffee with Maya became a habit before either of them named it as such. It started the morning after the rain, an unassuming cafe near the office that did not attempt charm and therefore succeeded at it. They arrived separately, ordered separately, and sat across from one another with a shared understanding that this was not a meeting disguised as something else. No laptops, no agenda. Jacob noticed the difference immediately. Without the scaffolding of work, Maya was quieter at first, more observant. She listened the way he did, attentively, without interruption, as if filing away information for later synthesis. So, she said, wrapping both hands around her mug, you always wake up early? Yes. Why? Habit, he replied. Also ambition. She smiled. At least you're honest. They talked about neutral things. Books, favorite neighborhoods, the mutual annoyance of people who treated busyness like a virtue. It was easy but not careless. Every so often, one of them would pause, recalibrate, and continue with intention rather than momentum. At work, they were careful, professional, precise. They didn't linger in doorways or trade glances in meetings. The project advanced steadily, their collaboration smoother now that underlying tensions had been named rather than ignored. But something had shifted. Jacob noticed it in the way Maya checked in with him before escalating decisions. Maya noticed it in how Jacob asked, not assumed, when priorities changed. They weren't perfect. They were aligned. 2 weeks later, the promotion conversation arrived earlier than Jacob had expected. Mark closed the office door and gestured for him to sit. Leadership is impressed, he said without preamble. Not just with outcomes, with how you're handling cross-functional complexity. Jacob nodded. Thank you. There's an opportunity opening up, Mark continued. Director level. It would mean broader oversight, more visibility, and it would require you to step away from direct leadership on the integration project. Jacob absorbed that, meaning Maya would take point from operations. Correct. Jacob leaned back, thinking not about ambition but about consequence. I need your answer by end of week, Mark added. No pressure. After Mark left, Jacob sat alone for a long moment, hands folded, the familiar calculation beginning in his mind. Career progression, increased scope, long-term alignment, and then impact. He thought about Maya's insistence on ownership, about trust not as sentiment, but as structure, about choosing forward rather than sideways. That afternoon, he asked Maya to walk with him. They stepped outside, the air warmer now, the city loud and unapologetic. I was offered a promotion, Jacob said. Maya glanced at him. Congratulations. I haven't accepted it. Her brow furrowed. Why not? Because it affects this project, he said. And you. She stopped walking. Jacob, I'm not asking you to weigh in on my career, he continued. I'm telling you because I don't want this to be a surprise. She studied his face. You'd be stepping back. Yes. And I'd be stepping up. Yes. Silence stretched between them. You're considering saying no, she said slowly. I'm considering timing, he replied. Not sacrifice. Her expression softened, something like relief flickering through. You don't owe me anything. I know, Jacob said. This isn't about owing. It's about choice. She exhaled. If you take it, I'll support it. I believe you, he said. But I also believe leadership isn't just about advancing yourself. Maya smiled faintly. You're infuriatingly principled. I've been called worse. That night, Jacob went home and didn't open his laptop. He cooked dinner, ate slowly, thought carefully. By morning, his decision was clear. He accepted the promotion with conditions. Mark raised an eyebrow but agreed. Jacob would transition into the new role after the integration reached stability, staying on long enough to ensure continuity. Maya would take the lead with full authority. When Jacob told her, she stared at him. You negotiated, she said. Yes. For the project, she added. For alignment, he corrected. She shook her head, smiling. You don't have to do things. No, he said. I don't. Their relationship didn't become dramatic or grand in the way movies suggested it should. There were no sweeping declarations, no rushed milestones. Instead, there were dinners that lasted longer than planned, conversations that went deeper than expected, and a growing sense of mutual steadiness. One evening, weeks later, they sat on Jacob's couch, shoes kicked off, city lights spilling in through the window. This feels solid, Maya said quietly. Jacob nodded. That's intentional. She smiled, leaning into him. I'm glad you didn't rush. So am I. Jacob looked at her then, not as a possibility, not as a variable, but as someone he was actively choosing. Forward. Not because it was easy, not because it was guaranteed, but because it was honest. And that, he knew now, was what made all the difference.